I'm Jimmy Schmitt, and you're listening to the first episode of The Other Side. This episode, we're building bridges with Malachi Burrow, a self-identified anarchist and anti-fascist, and understanding the roots of their political ideology. So, introduce yourself to the podcast.
Okay, my name's Malachi Burrow. I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I would probably politically describe myself as through the labels of anarchist, libertarian socialist, usually just leftist, secular humanist. Outside of that, I just want people to live the best possible lives that they can.
Okay. You said that you were an anarchist. Talk a little bit more about that. There's some misconceptions there about what that is specifically.
Yeah, so first off, Antifa is not an organized group. That's a common misunderstanding through more what I would call centrist media, where you have people who there is no organized group. It's a bunch of collectives. When I say anarchist, I'm not someone who wants to throw Molotov cocktails through the windows of big businesses or small businesses. I believe in destroying all unjust hierarchies. So things like the patriarchy and the idea of whiteness, which is the social construction that basically perpetuates racism in Western civilization. For those who might not know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So I want to destroy all of these things. And I feel like states, not governments, but states are unjust hierarchies where we can have more so governments that are more one-to-one representatives of the people, where it's more about people in certain communities being able to guide ourselves better than having more autocratic states do it.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that was really important to get into because a lot of people, like you said, they think that it's just about the throwing Molotov cocktails, and whereas there's an actual designation for what anarchy is. So being that you are an anarchist, how did you get to that position? Like, how did you get into politics? Maybe let's start there.
My journey into politics is I don't know how atypical my own experience is versus other people who might be leftist or liberal, conservative, whatever have you. I guess my political influences starts with some of the music I was listening to when I was younger. I listened a lot to Rage Against the Machine and System of a Down, which are two, I don't know if I would call them leftist, but they are towards that area where they're I don't know if they want to do away with capitalism. Some of them probably do, but not all of them. But they do. But they talked about like imperialism and colonialism being bad, and the historic racism in the United States, talking about the injustice that we did in the Iraq War. Basically, talking bad on the Bush administration.
Okay.
And I feel like that was my entryway. Around 2016, I could vote, and so I started getting into politics, and I started listening to Kyle Kulinski, who is a left-wing commentator.
Mm-hmm. He's the host of Secular Talk on YouTube.
Yes.
Is it on the radio as well?
I believe so. I don't know where you could find it on there, but I believe it is also a radio show, but most of his segments, I think all of his segments go onto YouTube. Mm-hmm. That was kind of there was the around 2016 2015 there was the like anti-SJW bubble, which is where comedy and like review content kind of became like overtly political, and that's where I think a lot of people my age, I being 22, started under like getting their influence of politics from these content creators. So I watch some of these content creators. Some of them I didn't watch. I think my politics might be different if I would have listened to some of them. I might not be as far left as I was, or as I currently am. I might have gone down like the alt-right pipeline, as it's called, where it's YouTube and other social media organizations tend to have a recommendation feature that allows you to go farther and farther right until you find yourself on neo-Nazi channels.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I actually before about 2018, that's when I started to vote. I'm 20, and I almost went down that pipeline that you just started talking about right now. Like that was something that I found myself like, and I kind of snapped out of it, but it was really weird.
It's who were the content creators that like drew you down that pipeline? I'm curious because I have my own.
Mm-hmm. It was well, it started with Steven Crowder, and then Sargon of Akkad was the big one, I think, which looking back is like hilarious to think about.
Because he's like just an open white nationalist at this point, like not even like me trying to smear. He's just an open white nationalist at this point.
But I think back then it was a little bit more coded, I guess. And Ben Shapiro is more like religious traditionalism, but that's still like they are friends with the alt-right, very close. If
Dennis Prager.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of people that were online and a lot of online content creators. Were there anybody that you knew in your own real life, like personal connections that you had with somebody that really influenced you in that position?
So my parents did introduce me into a lot more left-leaning content, which I don't know if they fully understood how left-wing the content was. Because they do more so identify as conservative. I'd probably put them at like a centrist level.
Okay.
Where I believe both my parents were two-time Obama voters who went towards Trump in 2016.
Okay.
And I'm trying to make sure they don't vote for Trump again, if that is a possibility. So I'm trying to think. I have a circle of friends. I have a podcast that I do with two fellow non-binary people who are both about as left as I am. I think I'm a little more on the libertarian versus authoritarian than them, and they're farther left than I am, but we're all basically in the same bubble of what you would call far left. And they were a big influence on like making me just see how these ideologies can work in practice and how to achieve the world that which I want to see.
Okay. Yeah. So you've mentioned your position. What are like, wedge issues, right? Issues that are kind of controversial. What would be, if you had to pick three, what are the most important issues for you?
Universal health care is the first. Addressing climate change is definitely up there, and there's so many issues that are important. I'm going to say LGBTQIA plus equality.
Okay, cool. So let's start with healthcare. You said universal healthcare, but there are a couple different ways that we could achieve universal healthcare. If you the two big ones being two-tier. It's kind of like how France has it, and then there's the single payer, which is the more common of the two. If you had to, would you have a preference of which one we would have?
I prefer single payer.
Okay.
But either way we get it in is fine. I'm even fine with a public option, which I know might be controversial to some leftists.
Yeah.
But when I describe myself as a leftist, I talk in ideals and where I want to. I'm never going to see an anarchist revolution in the United States in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I fully acknowledge that. I'm not going to see a leftist revolution. If there's any revolution that's going to happen in the United States right now, it's going to be a fascist one. But I do have these ideals, and I want to move future generations into a direction where they could reach those ideals that I have. And so even if it is a public option that which Biden is for, which great. I'm fine with having that because the more people who have healthcare, the less people we die because of not being able to get regular checkups and having things that shouldn't be problems become life-threatening issues.
Yeah. And then, so you talked about climate change. What kind of change would you like to see in that area?
When it comes to climate change, I feel like we need to do more to change regulations around how big businesses do disposal. Like, I believe 30% of all of the waste comes from like the average consumer, and 70% of it comes from like, I want to say 13 or 15 of like the biggest companies doing oil and other such things. And so the problem isn't the average person creating the waste; it's these huge corporations who are multi-billion-dollar corporations. We need to be able to put regulations on them so they aren't ruining the environment for everyone else.
Yeah.
This is just what we have.
Yeah. You talked about like most of it being big business. This is kind of tangentially related, but in California, you're probably aware we had like a water crisis a couple of years ago. There were tons of regulations for like individuals. Like I remember my dad got fined because he was washing the outside of our house with a power washer, and my dad got fined. And then but there were no stops for the agriculture industry, which I mean is understandable because agriculture is so big in California, but at the same time, like, there were no barriers for agriculture, but then there were very strict regulations for individuals. And so with LGBT rights, I feel like the question is not what would you like to see change, but what is the biggest threat? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we are moving in a very good direction, but there is a particularly with the newest Supreme Court nominee, there is like a massive threat towards LGBTQIA plus rights.
Yeah. So when it comes to the rights of people who are queer, and I use that in the not the derogatory sense, but in the sense of people who identify as LGBTQIA plus. The LGBTQ community has a lot of issues facing it, and it depends on who you are in the community. We need more representation for people who are intersex, and we need better education when it comes to people who are intersex, because not everyone is born male or female. We need, I think, better education when it comes to the difference between what is a man and what is a woman, and that fact that gender isn't intrinsically linked into someone's sex. We need more just media representation that humanizes trans people, whether they be binary or otherwise. There's a lot that we need to be doing, and a lot of it's socially, because there are a lot of people who are, I would describe, more right-wing, who do not want people like me, being I consider myself trans, to not have human rights, like the right to health care, like our president passed a law, I believe in June or July, I can't remember off the top of my head, but where he just straight up said that we can be refused the right to health care, which has been terrifying for me personally. I've been trying to find a psychiatrist to re-diagnose me and to see if I can do anything for my gender dysphoria that I feel. But my crippling anxiety and the fact that I could get refused from every psychiatrist in my area is a terrifying reality. And if anything is a threat, like any one specific thing. I think it's the rise of fascism that's happening in the United States that people kind of are refusing to talk about as fascism, which is, I think, foremost, I'm an anti-fascist. I believe fascism should be stopped wherever it's seen. That's one of the reasons I started to define myself more so as a leftist, is when I started. There's a quote from Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, where a character asks, "Are you a communist?" And the character replies, "No, I'm an anti-fascist." And the first person says, "So when did you become an anti-fascist?" And the person replies, "As soon as I found out about how fascism works," which is how I operate. And the best way to combat fascism from happening is that we have to have a secure liberal democracy, show why we need to have more leftist ideals, and eventually, once we leave liberal democracy behind, we kind of close off that gateway to fascism happening outright in a singular government.
Yeah.
I know I kind of jumped ship there.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. That's actually a really good topic. So you mentioned the rise to fascism, and that is a pressing issue in the United States.
Yeah.
What do you think is like, because there are a lot of people that are when they listen to this and they hear that there's a rise to fascism in the United States, they're going to say, what? No, there's no way. Right. But like, is there anything that you could point out to that is like, that you think would be like like the most obvious sign to somebody like you or I who are left leaning?
Give me a second. I'm pulling up in Fascism by Umberto Eco. He points out the 14 common features of fascism. And so when you start, now you don't have to reach all of these to be a fascist, and if you have some of these, that doesn't mean you are inherently a fascist. But I want to read these points off and have people who are listening compare this to certain people who are in power currently, mainly our president, to see how similar he aligns to fascists, and then after that, talking about the white nationalists that he just happens to endorse all the time. So the first point is the cult of tradition. One has only to look at the syllabus of every fascist movement to find the major traditionalist thinkers. The Nazi were nourished by traditionalists and occult elements. So basically worshiping tradition, the rejection of modernism, the cult of action for action's sake, disagreement is treason, the fear of difference, like if you're, I don't know, someone who is a person of color, or if you're a non-cis person or a non-straight person. Appeal to social frustration, like saying, look at the immigrants taking your jobs. The obsession with a plot. The enemy is both strong and weak. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy, like non-action and trying to be peaceful, like how Trump talks about the Iran nuclear deal. Contempt is for the weak. Everybody is educated to become a hero. Basically, it's a death cult. Machismo and weaponry, basically, it's also like toxically masculine. And when I say toxically masculine, like falling into toxic masculinity, like not being able to share emotions, like you have to be strong and never show weakness. Selective populism, so like universal health care, but only for people who are in certain groups. And then like newspeak, which is using vocabulary and syntax to use dog whistles or to reduce things into nonsense. And I feel Trump hits a lot of those 14 points. It doesn't help he just said for the Proud Boys to stand by, which have called themselves modern day brown shirts.
Yeah. So what are brown shirts for the people who might not know what brown shirts are?
I want to make sure I say this correctly. So the essay was the Nazi Party's original paramilitary wing, and it played a significant role in Hitler's rise to power. It basically, I believe they were instrumental in the fascists in Germany gaining power, and the Proud Boys have literally said they want to fulfill that role for Trump.
Yeah, this was probably the one thing that everybody saw if they did research or look at the debates. I think this was it's insane to me that he did not just like say, hey, stop, or I denounce this, but he said stand down and stand by specifically, which was interesting.
So this comes to like a lot of people who are more conservative or even people who are more liberal. When I end up calling someone a fascist or a racist, they get mad at me and saying that you shouldn't use those strong words. I get that sometimes. I go on Twitter and I hate myself for doing so. So one of the things that I respond with is, I don't care if Trump in it of him, like in his own heart, is not a racist or isn't a fascist. But if you do things that enable racism systematically or otherwise, and you enable a rise in fascism, which I think Trump enables with his anti-freedom of speech, saying that you should have up to a year in jail, or like minimum a year in jail for burning a flag, which is a 9-0 Supreme Court decision in favor of burning the flag.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a constitutional right.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you feel about it, that is a constitutional right. You can disagree or agree with that, but that is a right given to us by our Constitution. And talking about increasing libel laws for journalists that speak bad about him, it's these things that are inherently fascistic. And I don't care if he himself is a white supremacist, but he enables white supremacy and he doesn't talk bad about them. So if you bring up white supremacists and you don't bring up the fact that they're terrible people who want to be genocidal maniacs, then you aren't talking about them in the correct way, because the Proud Boys are a bunch of racist anti-Semites.
Yeah.
And we should talk about them like they are degenerates of society.
Yeah.
We should talk about them how they talk about trans people. Because they are the death of democracy. And now I know that sounds really extreme, but we've seen the warning signs. It can happen here.
Yeah. The biggest I'm gonna have to go back in editing and research if this is actually true, and I'll put something in if it's not, or there's some kind of correction. But I believe it was either the biggest or the only political rally to happen at Madison Square Garden was the American Nazi Party in like the 20s or 30s. I know that it was big, and I know it was at Madison Square Garden, and I know it was American Nazis, but I don't know if it was like the largest rally or if it was the only rally to be at Madison Square Garden. But I mean, just the fact that we were about to go fight the Nazis and we had an American Nazi Party meeting at a large stadium is kind of
something that gets overlooked in our history way too much, because we start talking about World War I in our history classes instead of talking about the fact that the American eugenicist movement from like the 1890s to like the 1930s is what inspired Adolf Hitler. He literally cited the American eugenicist movement as the reason. And so when people start quoting people like Stoddard from the early 20th century who were fascists, just straight up fascist, then we should be concerned. Because this is what people like Richard Spencer and Milo Yiannopoulos and David Duke and all of these people are quoting people from the early 20th century who inspired Hitler.
Yeah. I just like I don't think it's talked about enough, because people often like shoot down the idea of systematic racism, but like when South Africa was creating their apartheid system, they learned from the US.
Like people talk about segregation like it was a thing that happened. It's just like, no, this was an apartheid system.
Yeah.
And like the effects of it still stand. There's a great video about systematic racism by Some More News. It talks like debunking more conservative arguments of why systematic racism doesn't exist, usually from people who are into the internet, the intellectual dark web. I kept wanting to put internet and intellectual together. But that video is very good for anyone to kind of understand what systematic racism is and what it looks like, because you don't have to be saying the N-word and wearing a white hood to be a racist. I believe if you enable systems of racism, then you're a racist, because like that old Mark Twain quote, there's no difference between those who can't read and those who refuse to read. I see there's no functional difference. There is a difference, but there is no functional difference between someone who is racist and supports racist systems and someone who isn't racist and supports racist systems. Your outcomes are still the same, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah. So I know that you had something written down that you wanted to talk about. Did we hit it?
Yeah, I just had some just some leftist influences that I have, like obviously like Marx and Chomsky.
Yeah.
Okay. So like Marx, obviously I've read the Communist Manifesto. The older I've gotten, the more I've liked it. I think I first read it when I was about 18 or 17. And I thought it was an interesting ideal, but wouldn't work in function. And then I continued reading about it and more into theory, and now I just find Marx to be mostly correct. Chomsky, for a 92-year-old in 2020, is right on almost every issue except trans issues, because he doesn't strongly support it enough. It's not that he's basically said, like, people who use they them pronouns like myself and people who are trans, like, it's valid and it is a like struggle worth fighting for. He just doesn't fight for himself, which he should, because I believe he believes in intersectionality, though, which is the idea that if you're an oppressed group, you should fight for other people of other oppressed groups. The best way that I can find to explain it is that if you're doing a march for Black Lives Matter, you're fighting against the oppression of all Black people. Well, if your Black Lives Matter doesn't also fight ableism, then you're fighting oppression only for Black people who don't face disabilities, who do not have disabilities. And if it doesn't stand for queer issues, then you're only standing up for the rights to not be oppressed of Black people who are cishet, who don't have disabilities. And if you don't stand up for the rights of women, then you are specifically only fighting for cishet Black men who do not have disabilities. So you have to work in these intersections. If you want all Black people to be free, then that means every single person. You have to fight ableism at every chance, and sexism, and any form of homophobia or transphobia at any point. Bigotry should be destroyed, because to have any one group free, you kind of have to have all groups free.
Intersectionality actually is like one of the harder things to understand for people who are unfamiliar with lefty ideology, I guess. I'm glad you kind of spelled it out, because Ben Shapiro had a PragerU video. I believe it was recently, but he said that intersectionality was the oppression Olympics, and I was like, that's not accurate. Come on now.
Like, I don't think it's the oppression Olympics to be like, okay, I am a white non-binary person, and that is a Black trans woman. Now, we face similar oppression based on our gender identity, but they face an additional oppression because they're Black. So I don't understand what makes, like, it's not about showing that we have more oppression. It's about recognizing that people are more oppressed than you are, and trying to help eliminate that oppression. There's this usually farther right talking point, but I see this from people who are just conservative, where they act like trans trenderism is a thing, where it's like this idea that trans people are just being trans because it's like the cool new thing, which is a fundamentally ridiculous argument.
Yeah.
Which I can, in case anyone is wondering why that's so ridiculous, as someone who is non-binary, I have to worry about every time I dress more feminine as someone who still keeps their facial hair, because I like to hold on to that aspect of my masculinity. But outside of that, I dress more feminine. I like makeup. Traditionally feminine things I like. I like being in that semi-androgynous zone. So if I go outside and wear a dress, I have to worry about getting hate crime every time. I have to be worried about being refused healthcare when I go talk to a doctor. If I could not be non-binary and be the same person I am, I would. Not because not being non-binary isn't valid. It's the fact that I am in a state of oppression that people like me, including me, aren't treated the same as everybody else. And we wouldn't do this if this wasn't like the only way that we could live our lives without hating ourselves all the time.
Yeah. Wow. That
I feel like that's an important thing to say.
Yeah, that is important thing to say, because also, like, I'm sure that there's I mean, I don't know how many people this that will listen to this, but I'm sure that there's somebody that might stumble upon the podcast that, like, it's kind of like it's more of a solidarity type thing. Like, there are more people that are struggling with the same thing that I am, and just like saying that, hey, this is a problem I face will kind of help somebody feel better about it, because they're like, hey, like, I'm not the only one, like, I'm not crazy. You know. So I wrote this down, and we talked about it a little bit before that you wanted to get into it, but you wanted to talk about Trump and COVID, since we are in a pandemic currently as of recording.
Yeah, as of recording, we're still under the pandemic of COVID-19.
Yeah. I don't know how strict the regulations were here, but in California we had a pretty strict lockdown. Like LA, like, it took, like, you know, you've probably heard of, like, Los Angeles is ridiculous traffic. My friend, he lived down the 405, and I visited him for 4th of July, and he to get to his place, I had to go down the 405, which is the most traveled highway in the US, and it was a breeze. Like, there was nothing. And I don't know if it was any different out here. I don't know if much changed here.
We didn't have a lot of change. We never had mandatory masks. We had a curfew for not too long, but not a lot was done. I think our governor personally did not do enough for our state. I feel like we should have done a Japan system nationwide, where they basically socialized everything. They gave out masks for everyone, which our postal service was going to do, just to let people know. And then the Trump administration said, nope, you're not going to give masks to everyone. They were just going to do a service where everyone was going to get a mask. And then Trump's like, no.
Yeah.
And that baffles me. Not really, because I believe he is a fascist, and he has a death cult around him where he can't admit that he's wrong.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's this double standard that happens with conservatives and more liberal leaning and left leaning people, where people will never shut up about H1N1, about how many people died because of swine flu.
Oh yeah.
But over 200,000 Americans died because Trump refused to do anything.
Yeah.
And like, he closed down China, which wasn't a full close down.
And really wasn't the biggest problem anyway.
There were already people here, and we should have treated them as soon as possible. And there were so many other things that we could have done. We basically should have nationalized wages, like I believe Spain did this. and worked out fine. Spain's doing okay.
So what do you mean when you say nationalized wages? Like,
so what would happen is that the businesses can't fire anyone, and then the government takes on the responsibility to pay everyone's wages.
Okay.
Which some might say that's extreme, but our military budget is bigger than the next 10 countries, most of which are our allies. And if we cut it in half, we're still have the largest military budget by far than the next country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was either 2019's military increase or 2018's military increase could have paid for universal health care.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this contradiction where if I bring up I want healthcare for everyone, people ask, how do you want to pay for it? But if you want 30 or 50 new tanks and a couple new jets, and you want to perpetuate endless war in the Middle East, that doesn't have a price tag associated with it. That's just built into our American democracy. But helping the people isn't built in, which is strange to me.
Yeah. So I mean, I know it's kind of a weird question to ask, but because there are so many problems with the way taxes and funding is for our government. But is that like the main way, like if in a perfect world, or if you were in charge, like that's how you would pay for that system? Like you would just kind of cut the military budget?
I would do that. I increase taxes on the like uber rich. I don't think anyone should be a billionaire. No one can spend that much money in their lifetime.
Yeah. And like to think that I think I heard you know Hassan Piker, right?
Yeah.
I think the way he explained it was there's no way that like Jeff Bezos worked like 1,000 times harder than like a millionaire or so. Like there's no way that he worked 1,000 times harder than that person to get to where he is.
Well, yeah, and do you think he worked like 100,000 times harder than like the average, like those Amazon workers who pass out on the ground, like in Amazon factories because they don't give them enough breaks?
Yeah. Did you watch the when there was some kind of committee where there was like the CEOs of Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Apple. I think it was about do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm unfamiliar with what you're talking about.
Basically there was a House committee called, and I think it was about monopolies, I believe. Hold on. I don't know. But I remember like whenever there was a Democrat who was called to answer questions, they would ask Amazon about like predatory business practices. And this one lady, like this one congressperson, she brought up like diapers.com, and like I had never heard of diapers.com, but apparently like Amazon like just cut the prices of the diapers they sold on their website, and they lost a lot of money during that month. But then diapers.com went out of business, and then they almost went bankrupt, and then Amazon bought diapers.com. And I thought like that is, if that's not predatory business practice, I don't know what is. Like,
yeah, I don't understand why so many people, and I'm going to use some more modern slang, why do people simp for billionaires? I don't get this idea. Like, why do people like Elon Musk? He's not an engineer. He didn't create anything. Tesla was already a company. He just bought it, and he has literal blood money from South African emerald mines which are from his family. Like, he's not Tony Stark. Stop romanticizing him. He is a terrible billionaire who does not deserve the money he has.
Yeah.
He's an idiot. I hate Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I just don't understand like the Reddit dude bro fascination with Elon Musk.
I think it's, I mean part of me wants to say that like Elon Musk he's like, I mean he kind of knows like the fundamentals, right? Like, because I mean, you've seen that video. There was like the Chinese billionaire, like Jack Wu or something, and him and Elon Musk were on a stage, and then the one guy would just say some wild crap, and then Elon would be like, no, that's not how that works. like, have you seen that?
Every time I think of Elon Musk, I think of the Cybertruck.
Yeah.
Where he's like, these windows are indestructible.
Crack.
Breaks the window.
Oh, man.
So, like, and the physics of that don't make sense. You want your car to crumple or you will die in a car crash. That's why cars do that. That's not... Yeah. I just hate him so much. I don't understand why we need billionaires. There are people who are homeless, and we have more houses than we do the population of the U.S. We could probably give homes to homeless people.
Yeah.
We don't do that. We have billions of dollars sitting in people's bank accounts that they will never use and only will pass on to inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we just use that to make sure everyone has like food and water and shelter? Like, that's all I want for people. I don't want to like have like an authoritarian regime come in and now we're all like atheist gays like some people act like communists want. I just want people to have healthcare. I want us to live in a clean environment. I want food, water, and shelter for everyone regardless of tax bracket. Like, that's all I want the world to be. If the world is like that before I leave and I helped it get there, then like I feel like I've done enough on my time on this earth.
And the Nordic system gets brought up a lot, but like Sweden is a country of 9 million people, I think, and they have 9 billionaires. And then I forget how many billionaires the United States has, but it's like less per capita. The United States has less billionaires per capita than Sweden. And I feel like that is the telltale sign. Like, we could implement more taxes. We could move towards that Nordic system and things would still be fine and dandy. That there would be no economic like hindrance like a lot of free market people try to say.
There's a lot of people, I'm not trying to straw man people when I say this. These are arguments that I've been given by people and that I hear constantly. For instance, I got political my senior year, like about 4 years ago, my like senior year of high school, and I stopped standing for the Pledge of Allegiance because the under God thing was meant to atheist shame people during the Cold War because Stalin was an atheist. And kind of banned religion, which is a bad thing. People should... I like our secular government, which we have no influence on religion, and it should stay like that. But like, I stopped standing for the Pledge of Allegiance because it was used to atheist shame people, and I'm not say under God. I'm just not going to do it. I don't have to pledge allegiance to the flag. I pay taxes.
Yeah, it's kind of a cult thing too. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's kind of cultish. But so people would call me a Nazi. They would call me a communist. They would call me Chinese, which I think they meant like a Chinese communist, like Mao. But like, I'm presuming a lot. I'm very white. I don't know why that was said. Anyway, like, people would say like, if you don't like it, then leave. And that's not why I'm criticizing. I'm criticizing because I like the U.S. I think we have the potential to be the greatest country. We're not right now. We don't have the happiest people. We have super high prison rates. We have really high crime rates. And these are things that we can fix and do better on. We just need to like move forward and like not just say what we have now is good because it is what we have. The world can be better.
I think you hit on a really good point. That we, like, you and I are both lefties. We don't hate the U.S. Like, this is like, I think I when I was driving here from California, I'm on campus right now in St. Louis, and I think I saw a sign that, like a billboard that was like, if you don't like it, then leave, Trump 2020. There were a bunch of like billboards, like they were like, as you're passing them, like you see them, and then I know for a fact there was one that said, if you don't like it, then leave. And I was like, that's not why I criticize. It's not because I don't like the US. I love this country. I love living here. You know, like,
yeah,
I just want it to be better for more people. And that's like the crux of the position. It's not like, oh, I hate this country. This country is so much better.
Mm-hmm. I love this country, and I want it to be as good as I can see that it can.
Yeah.
Like, I see such potential in our Constitution is like the greatest living document.
Yeah.
I love our Constitution has flaws. I don't want to get into that. The 13th Amendment's weird.
Yeah.
With slavery's basically bad unless it's through our private prison systems.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's a whole other thing. But I lost my train of thought.
We don't hate the US.
Oh yeah, like there's this Allen Ginsberg poem called America, which kind of like where he's not ashamed for like having a socialist and communist background, and that he doesn't hate America. He just loves it so much that he has to criticize it, because loving America isn't sticking by it no matter what. It's being able to look at America for what it is and be able to criticize it and praise it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Just as a quick aside, did you have like a target time for how much time you wanted to spend on this, or?
I'm fine with however long we want to go on this. I didn't know if you had any time obligations.
Yeah,
I don't have a time obligation till like 5 o'clock, so I'm like
okay.
So I'm just fine with whatever.
Okay.
I don't know if you had like it needs to be under a certain amount or not.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, I don't. I'm gonna have to send an email later, but yeah, no, I don't have any time obligations. Let's see, what else could we talk about? Is there anything else that you feel important? I know you talked about or you asked if we were going to get into current events.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any current events in particular that you wanted to get into?
I don't know if I should speak on Trump having COVID or not, because I feel like people get mad if I talk. It is a spicy take, but I think people can understand where I come from on my take,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I think if I just say my take outright without explaining it, people will assume the worst out of me.
Is there a way that you could give the explanation first?
Yeah.
And then give the take?
Yeah. So Trump has COVID. I find it ironic. It's hilarious to me. It's like a guy throwing a boomerang and saying, "Look at this boomerang. It's not going to come back. It's fake. Look, it's made in China. It's not. Look, it's fake." He throws the boomerang and he keeps talking bad about the boomerang. And then it hits him in the back of the head and he falls over. That's how I feel about Trump dying of COVID. And I don't feel sympathetic for Trump having COVID because I don't wish anyone to die.
Mm-hmm.
But as someone who has been denied healthcare rights, so if I'm getting in a car crash or I get COVID-19, I could go to a hospital and be like, "Hey, I'm showing signs of COVID. I need to be treated." And they ask me questions and they assume my gender, and I say, "No, I'm non-binary." A doctor can look and be like, I don't want to serve you. I don't want to do my medical oath and help you." Mm-hmm. That's a thing. So if Trump somehow ends up dying of a disease he could have prevented from being as big of an issue and wasn't trying to oppress minorities that include myself, then I might feel more sympathetic to him. But from my eyes, he's a fascist who wants people like me to die of possible medical complications. So if he dies of a medical complication, I'm not going to feel so sorry for him. I'm just going to laugh. And I know that seems harsh and that's not civil and I should be the bigger person, but I'm not going to. I shouldn't have to be. He doesn't wish, he's not a civil interlocutor. He's not someone who's trying to be a good person. Mm-hmm. He's just trying to win. And if he ends up dying of COVID, then he dies of COVID. And if he doesn't die, then he doesn't die. I'm not like praying every night. That'd be weird because I'm an atheist, but like I'm not praying by my bedside every night now going like I hope Trump dies of COVID.
Yeah.
But like if he dies, I'm not going to feel sad about it. I'm not going to feel bad about it. If anything, I'm going to laugh and have a fun night of drinking afterwards and then probably never think about it again except politics, so I will have to think about it.
Yeah.
Is that a spicy take?
I don't know. I don't feel like it is, but it might be to some people.
And I can understand why that might be to some people. I feel like those people also probably don't face systematic oppression.
Yeah.
Now, if someone does think that I'm stepping out of line and is someone who faces systematic oppression, I still think you're wrong, but I don't see a lot of people recognizing their systematic oppression and feeling sorry for the dude who's systematically oppressing people.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say something. Yeah. Yeah. I think it might be time to call it because I can't think of anything. Well, thanks for being on the first episode.
No problem. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Yeah. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode with a left-winger, watch out for the next episode with a right-winger.